Food is more than just what's on our plate. It's the places where it's grown, it's the people who grow it, and so much more. Join me, Janice Person, your host, on Grounded by the Farm every other week as we talk about the foods we love. Today, I drove out into the wild, wonderful world of Iowa. And this week is a good place to be because the Iowa Hawkeyes, which is not where you went to school, but go girl basketball. It was pretty awesome to watch it. So I'm here to see a farmer in Iowa. And this is not one of those farms that a lot of people have said, ooh, when are you going to a cricket farm? I don't think people think of cricket farms at all, but Shelby Smith is sitting here and she's just grinning. She showed me through the farm. And so we're going to talk all kinds of things about crickets. And the first thing I probably need to help people get past, maybe the ick factor. You get a lot of the ick factor, right?
I for sure get plenty of ick factor.
Yeah, so eating bugs is not something that a lot of Americans do.
But they do. They're just swimming bugs. So that's one of those things I always tell people, if you're allergic to Cretaceous shellfish, you do not need to be trying crickets because you might have an allergic reaction. They are that closely related.
Girl, you like skipping ahead to the food allergy section. I love it.
Sorry.
No, but here's the thing. Like, I can remember trying crickets probably 10 years ago. You and I were both in Austin. We didn't see each other while we were there for South by Southwest, but one of the first times I went to Austin for South by, at one of the receptions, they had cricket snacks. And then a year or so later, a few months later, I don't know, I was at Google for some things and they had cricket snacks. And I will say, I preferred the ones that were ground and used in flour for chocolate chip cookies.
Fair.
Right? But how did you, like, out of all the things you could do, Shelby, you're an athlete who loves being active. You have great degrees in finance, right?
Yep.
How did you decide cricket farming?
Are you trying to say that I didn't grow up dreaming of becoming a cricket farmer?
Well, I didn't see the linear path.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Your dad has corn, soybeans, or something, wheat.
Corn and soybeans. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. No, so we are, sitting in the shop that I grew up in. This is where I learned how to shoot a basketball and do all of those things. There used to be a balcony up there that the basket was attached to, and my dad and I would have fierce games of horse, and I couldn't beat him until I was in about 5th grade, and then he could never beat me again. So when we have he's got a pit where everything drains into, and for whatever reason, we called it the dreaded lid shot because he could hit that every time, and for some reason,
and it would go in there.
It would go in. No, I mean it wouldn't go in. He'd make the basket, and inevitably I'd get a letter because he was just in my head. But so this is where all that started. But outside of that, I really wanted nothing to do with agriculture. I wanted nothing to do with the state of Iowa. I was very adamant in high school that I was leaving on a jet plane and never coming back again. And luckily, I got pretty good at basketball and earned a full scholarship to play at St. Joseph's University out in Philadelphia, Atlantic 10 Conference. We made the NCAA tournament my senior year. We got beat, but first round.
There's a lot of schools. Even get in the tourney is a big deal.
Yes, and it was. But so, like I said, luckily that was the path I ended up on, and my undergraduate degree is in finance. And then after I graduated from St. Joe's, I went overseas and played in Ireland with a program called Sport Changes Life. So it is a 3-part program. It was part service, so we coached in underprivileged areas in Dublin, part education, so I got my master's degree paid for again by basketball at an Irish university. I have a master's in finance from Trinity College in Dublin. And then we got to continue playing. So I played in the Premier League there in Ireland. Really rekindled my love for basketball, if you will, because after college I was definitely burnt out.
Kind of worn out, yeah.
Yeah, and it was one of those where I knew that the playing was going to be part of the program, and it almost made me say I didn't want to do it because it was to that point. Thankfully, I went through with it and went over to Ireland, and so I graduated from Trinity College in Dublin. Early 2014 were when exams were done, and then we were supposed to spend the summer writing our thesis to then graduate in November, which I did all of that, but I also got a job at the same time. So I wound up as a risk management intern at a brand new trading desk for a Canadian bank in Dublin. And when I walked in there, I was the 7th employee, and there were about, $30 million in trades on the books, which seems like a lot to you or I, but like it's tiny in terms of actual trading numbers. And
yeah,
then,
because it's not like it's your money.
Right. Yes, exactly. But so 7th employee, risk management intern. 3 months later, I had 5 interns of my own. Another 3 months, they moved me into a trading role as a junior trader for that Canadian bank. Yep. So I stayed there for about 3.5 years before I figured out, finance, not really my thing. It's just really not my thing. I didn't really have a plan of what I was going to do after, but I handed in my notice and said, well, I'll just move back to the family.
Take some time.
Yeah, I'll move back to the farm. I'll move back to my parents' basement that I said, the state I was never coming back to come help my dad, do
and figure out what you wanted to do.
Yes, but I suppose the piece that I skipped over is I did nothing to help growing up. Like, absolutely
You had
zero.
basketball. You could get out of it.
Yes, and that was always, my parents were very good about, like, your job is school and sports. Like, if you are not interested in this, and my dad always tells a story of when I was young, my mom would bring me to ride in the tractor, and 10 minutes later he'd be calling me like, come get her, because I'd be just climbing up the freaking walls. I was so bored. Just in case, like, I did not take to it. I have an older brother that, like, he took to it like a duck to water.
Yeah.
And he was,
loved time in the tractor, could be there all day without, yeah.
There is a relatively infamous story of my brother being somewhere between 5 and 8 years old, driving down the road with the field cultivator behind the tractor, and the sheriff looking at him knowing he couldn't do anything about it. But just, my brother just barely tall enough to reach the clutch kind of thing. But, that was what he did, and that made sense, and he loved doing it, but I just did not.
That's funny.
Yeah, so for me coming back to do the whole corn and soybean thing, I was like, yeah, well, we'll see what happens, and I survived. I spilled a lot of corn and learned some things, shall we say. But when I got back, it was October 1st, so it was the beginning of harvest. Or
everybody's busy. There's always something to be done.
Yes. And so hopped off the plane, literally 26 hours with layovers and everything of flying, traveling, all the things. It's dark outside because it's like 8 o'clock in the fall. And my dad goes, all right, let's go move corn. And I'm like, great. I don't know how to drive the tractor. I don't know how to do any of these things.
You go bunny.
Trial by fire. So I learned how to drive the tractor that night, unload corn, all of those things. The next day, he's like, all right, you're getting in the grain cart, which for those of you who don't know what a grain cart is, it's what goes along next to the combine where they're harvesting, and you're supposed to catch essentially all of the grain coming.
So Leslie has been on our show before, and she is the quintessential grain cart girl.
Yes.
she loves the mockery of the fact that if you don't know all the signs that other people are using, you are going to be messed up all day.
Oh, we have two-way radios, so if you know, you find out. If
you get screamed at.
Yes, you do. So there's no hand signals or anything. There's yelling, which is fine. So I went through all of that, survived it, and we got all the equipment cleaned up and in the shed for the winter. And then, my dad and I started having conversations. He was like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want me to teach you this? I absolutely can. You'll get the hang of it. It might take a couple of years, but we'll get you there. You can do this and that's fine. Or if you want to figure something else out, go for it. We'll help you get started.
Yeah.
Do
some research.
Yeah.
Look into things.
Just whatever.
Figure out a path.
Yes. I think at the time they probably had.
And you went fishing? No. Crickets came up somehow.
It did.
Corn and soybeans is not like a cricket adjacent crop.
Not even close. Not even close. Well, and that's where I think in their mind they maybe had like grass-fed beef or like sugar beets or something that's
wine grapes.
Yeah, I mean, like something. But to their credit, the way it came up for me is I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and so the podcast back in 2017, it was the month of December, and eating bugs, which entomophagy, came up on like 3 different podcasts. I think at the time, I was listening to Tim Ferriss, and he was advertising for a company, and then it was some fitness podcast I was listening to. They had a partnership with Thrive Market, and I believe like Chirps Chips were on that at the time, and so they were eating those things. They were talking about it, and so that was where it came up and got on my radar. And then all I remember is it being really, really cold. New Year's Day of 2018, like -17. I just remember being downstairs next to the fireplace being like, why did I move back in here? Like,
this is insane.
Yes. What was I thinking? And I don't even know why I Google searched it or what I actually Google searched, but an article from the Des Moines Register from 2015 popped out about a woman raising crickets for human consumption in Keystone, Iowa, which is about 45 minutes east of where we sit. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so I sent an email to both my parents who were sitting upstairs and was like, hey, look at this. And they were both like, well, we've seen weirder things happen. Like, go do some research and see what you come up with.
So your parents bought you your first crickets?
No, they did not. They supplied the location for me to raise my first crickets. And my mother's kitchen is where I made my first cricket product. So my parents definitely love me. But the room that we are sitting in, which is the break room of my dad's shop, which this room happens to be double insulated for noise purposes, because the idea was, you can come in here and take a call. It also happens to be a bunker for some reason, and you don't get any cell service in here. So
tornadoes and stuff like that are good, though.
Sure. Something like, I don't know that I'd want to be in here in a tornado. Probably be moseying over to the house and down into the basement personally. But yeah, so this was just set up for, temperature control, that kind of thing. So this is where my first 10,000 crickets, I bought them 10 days after I sent them the article, because that was the research, quote unquote, that I could find. Like, there was none. It wasn't out there. There were not a lot of resources. My best resource for the basics of growing crickets were reptile owners that were feeding them to their bearded dragons, things like that. They had their own colonies that they had to maintain because they're expensive. And so they gave me the basics, and I just was like, well, I'll just buy 10,000. We'll see what happens. And then the rest is really kind of history.
Okay, so I've watched so many of your Instagram videos and stuff like this. So going deeper is really fun for me, because it's like I get bits and pieces of it. So it does all connect. You're the same story on all the things. It's like, but we're talking for 30 minutes. So we get to really understand how you did some of these things. So do your parents eat crickets? Do they like crickets? Did they at the time think, I'm not eating crickets?
So my dad's always been like, yeah, I'll eat it. Like, whatever. He'll just grab it. He'll try it. But so he grew up on a dairy farm in Northeast Iowa. He's one of 10 kids. He's
eaten anything he's gotten his hands on at some point.
Yes. Anything and everything. And, all of the offal, my grandma would make that. Tongue, liver, all the
organ meats and everything.
All of it.
Yes.
Nothing went to waste, especially when you have freaking 10 mouths to feed and 7 of those 10 are boys. At some point you are literally going to eat any and everything. So he has a, relatively speaking, as diverse of a palate as you can have as a Northeast Iowa farm boy. He's not necessarily fearful of trying things. So he's always been on board with grabbing a whole cricket, doesn't mind, would try it, no big deal. My mom's a little hesitant on the whole cricket thing, but she's also, I made a cow tongue in the crock pot the other day to make tongue tacos, and she was like, oh. And then, then I shredded it up, and she tried it. She's like, oh, this is really good. I was like, yeah, you just don't like the visual, and I get that.
Yeah.
So,
some people it's smell, some people it's texture, sometimes it's visual.
Yes.
People have aversions to various things for various reasons.
Yes, and not all of them are logical, shall we say?
Right. Exactly. No.
Yes. So they've always been okay with it, and sometimes when I'm harvesting crickets, I will hold a few back because they're really good fresh sauteed, and it's just a very different flavor and texture from my dry roasted crickets. The way I would describe it, and this is not my analogy, I stole it from someone else who eats a lot of insects, is it's bananas to banana chips.
Okay.
Exact same ingredient, exact same thing, very different flavor, very different texture.
Yeah.
So similar in that way. Sauteed crickets, I say, are meatier than roasted crickets.
Well, because when you dry roast it, it's all crunchy at a certain point.
Yes. The texture, I would say, outweighs the flavor.
Yeah.
With roasted crickets, for sure. Whereas, like I said, the fresh sauteed crickets, they're just surprisingly little meaty snacks.
Well, if you go to street markets in Asia and stuff, you can eat things like flash fried scorpions. So there's definitely things that maybe more averse to.
Yes.
But it does make people kind of go, oh, I'm not sure, right? Like it makes people think twice. Do we think it's really a building market? Because to me, it's so strange. I've had this conversation going on in parts of my world for a long time. But introducing it to like a lot of my family, crickets don't come up as a menu item. They don't know even how to buy them or why you would want to buy them or something. So where are we on that bell curve or something?
Yeah, we are definitely not in the hockey stick portion yet, in my opinion. I tell people think of crickets and or just edible insects as the whole umbrella as sushi in the 80s. Like it was happening in the trendy spots in New York and things like that. But it was not
Seattle. It's been big in San Francisco.
Yes,
yeah.
For a long time.
Yeah.
But now, sitting here in 2023, 40 years later, I can drive
I've had sushi in Ankeny and stuff. So yeah,
exactly. That's
Ankeny is a town in Iowa for people who may not know.
Yes, it's about 20 minutes south of here. So yes, that's always my point. I'm always like I have.
But in the 80s, 90s, I would have never eaten sushi in the middle of the country.
No, you wouldn't. And like you can get it as like a grab and go at our grocery stores and some of our gas stations and things like that. Like, so if you start thinking of it in that
you're
context,
talking maybe decades before it's common for people to think of crickets.
Yes. And then I also think about like success in this market is no, you're not going to get everyone to eat insects. So what? Like that's not the goal. And my goal is also not to replace and or take away any other meat source, any other major protein source. Like eat what works for you, works for your body, works for your beliefs. Like do that. Do whatever makes you happy there. I'm not here to take away anything from anyone.
Not proselytizing.
Not at all. Oh, in fact, like completely the opposite. I'm like, all right, whatever. More for me then. So I think success in this market looks like, capturing 10% of the shellfish or the seafood market.
Okay.
That's where you start to make real inroads.
Yeah.
And, food's a really complex one where it is a combination of, taste, price, all of the things that go into it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that are just in flux or in their infancy, shall we say, in the edible insect market.
Okay, so I have to ask this one just because one summer I had a nephew living with me and protein powders took over my kitchen.
Yeah.
And some of the protein powders, like you had to have with peanut butter because the taste of the protein powder was so not what he wanted, right? So a protein powder is a big thing for crickets, right? So a friend in St. Louis has oatmeal with, it's Mighty Cricket is the name of the company.
Yes, Sarah.
Right. And so protein powder is one area. Is that something you're doing?
So I do 100% cricket powder. I really want nothing to do with the supplement market. I think you start getting into some of that, you're just really early. You're so far from price parity that then your education curve becomes huge.
Yeah.
And so for me, like I have 3 different product lines. I have my whole roasted crickets. I have my cricket bars, which have the cricket powder in them. And then I have the 100% cricket powder.
People can use the powder in whatever they want to.
I tell people think of the 100% cricket powder as a high protein flax meal. You can mix it in anything you want, but you're never going to take a spoonful of it, throw it in your mouth and be like, that was delicious. I should do that again. Like it needs to be paired with something, and that's okay. There's things that we eat that, we do that flax meal. Great example. Yeah. So I don't really want anything to do with that market yet. I'm not saying like exclusively I don't. I'm not saying I think that there's no opportunity
but right now you're in a different space.
Right now I'm just in a different space, and like I said,
and you're already sold out from last year. So
yes. Yep. So 6% of my overall sales are made up of my cricket powder.
Yeah.
Now that's some of my best recurring revenue, like with subscriptions and things like that. So there is a place for it for sure, and it's not something I will ever drop off of. But in terms of coming out with like a flavored protein powder, I have no desire. Part of it I don't want to do. I don't want to do or deal with the food engineering that goes into it.
Right.
And I think it just kind of gets away from my values of minimally processed sort of things. And then I think from an economic perspective, to make it like per serving comparable to any of your, like, you're never going to be comparable to whey. Like, that's a byproduct of an already existing industry that they're just diverting.
It's a byproduct. So you make it useful and you find a way, oh, wow, what does this offer? And
And so understanding that, and at the same time understanding there is an opportunity with, 2/3 of the world being lactose intolerant to a certain extent.
Yeah, exactly.
There are other opportunities for a protein powder. People want that convenience. Sure.
Yeah.
But so again, as you start to look at alternatives there, you still can't compete on price whatsoever unless you're cutting it with some other sort of protein.
Mm-hmm.
That for me, again, that just doesn't, that's not the way I want to go yet. I got enough on my plate as it is. I can't.
Yeah, well,
and
you're early enough in the market
yes.
that you can kind of pick and choose for now, and you can always grow and develop into some of those other segments later,
for sure.
Right?
Exactly. Or the alternative it is, like, I am vertically integrated, so that gives me a lot more ability to pivot into, so if somebody wants to source the crickets for me to put it in their cricket powder or into their game, great, do it. I just don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I guess it's perhaps more of it.
I love it. So there's so many bunny trails I could go down. Obviously, you and I could both talk all day. This is going to be a bad problem for me later, trying to hit the 30 minutes or something. So when you think about the product, so I saw the video you shared of some kids trying some product that I think their grandmother bought.
Yes.
And they were adorable kids eating little crunchy crickets. It made me think of my nephew eating little crunchy fish. Do you think it's going to be more like Gen Alpha, Gen Z? Is it just going to be the boomers aren't going to have anything to do with it?
So interestingly, I mean, the grandma that bought them, like, that was a boomer, so it is, I get that question a lot of, like, do you focus on the younger age? And I say yes and no. Whether a good thing or a bad thing, I am my own marketing department, and everybody associates Jim and Eat Crickets like, oh, it's Shelby. And so I as I think about scaling and doing things like that, I'm like, ooh, am I doing something wrong on this? Am I making a problem for myself further on down the road where I can't divorce myself from this? It's fine. I'll figure it out. But so when I think about who my target market is, my target market are moms that are 25 to 40 with kids that are 12 and under.
Okay.
If grandma gets on board, great.
Yeah.
But so when I first set out doing this, though, what I thought was going to be my target market was 18 to 35-year-old males that do outdoor adventurous things.
Yeah.
It is not. It's like 3-to-1, women to men, all ages.
Yeah.
That will try crickets the first time. I have some theories about that. One of them, traditionally, women are the gatekeepers of nutrition of the household and generally are responsible for majority of the household spending. So therefore, like, we are more likely to be adventurous and try new things before we are going to put it in front of our family. So, that is my target market. But, like, my oldest customer ever was a 101-year-old Pacific Front World War II vet that told me, because I was like, wow, I get a lot of people that are like, you can't get older generations to try these. I'm like, oh, no, you can. You just need to talk to them a little bit. And I said, thank you for service. Thanks for buying these. He said, well, I ate a lot worse in the service, ma'am. And I was like, oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Not
exactly a ringing endorsement you want to put on Instagram,
no, but a funny story all the same.
It is.
So I had a set of twins that were 2 years old that their parents would stop every weekend at the farmer's market because they had to come get their crickets. And before they left my booth,
they were eating them.
They had to open them and they would put them in their hand. They'd eat them and they'd say, more bug. Like, that is what they would say.
Yeah.
And then I have all the way up, like I said, I have later generation boomers that are like, yeah, I love putting your powder in my smoothie. Like, it's great. It makes me feel good. And so if you ask me my target market, that's what it is. But
and other people just find you occasionally. Yeah. Right.
But I think that's with anything, you know, and when I first started this back in 2018, so 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, which feels like an entirely different world now, I was averaging one speaking engagement a week, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a radio interview, whether it
Yeah,
be speaking to a Kiwanis club, you know, a Rotary club, anyone that would be like,
I saw some funny video of you talking to one of those kind of groups.
yes, but so that was my main marketing. And you want to talk about, you know, like generally speaking, an older generation that I was getting in front of. But, and I always, every single presentation from
most of them love to see somebody young doing something.
Yes. And so that was what I realized early on, that the longer I could talk to people, and again, not like proselytizing at all. I was, you know, I asked the question in my presentation, how many of you have ever eaten an insect before? You know,
on purpose.
Yes, on purpose is always the qualifier I give, is on purpose. And, you know, inevitably you get like one or two hands, depending on the room that you're sitting in. And then I always follow that up with, how many of you are completely grossed out by the thought of eating insects? And I'm like, don't lie, there's at least one of you. And, you know, somebody sheepishly will raise their hand, and then somebody else will do it too. By the end of those presentations, I have like a 95% success rate of people trying their first cricket. So it, one way or another, it
so
ends
you
up
enable some growth there.
Yes.
It's really, so it's kind of that idea of it in their head is so much worse than actually doing it, right? And I think that's what TV shows like Fear Factor really tried to create for people, is that if you build it up in your head, you're never going to try new things. And, you know, like my nieces and nephews, we're always trying new stuff, right? Like, we love new things.
Yes. Well, and it's that, and you know, some people will say that is a barrier to entry to the industry, if you will, is that, you know, you have that initial ick factor, you have that really emotional response. But I've found that is actually the easier avenue in to have the conversation, because you're so taking someone out of their like, comfort zone just with the thought of existing, that they're like, wait, I have so many questions. And the longer they sit there and talk to you, the more they're like, okay, maybe. And then they see somebody else do it and they're like, well, they were fine. And so
then somebody puts them in chocolate chip cookies.
Yes, exactly. So
and you can put protein in a chocolate chip cookie.
It's basically health food at that point.
It is. It is. So tell me, when we looked through the farm, and we'll show video of that so people can look at it on the website, but tell me, what are like are there food safety concerns? You mentioned allergies. So if you're allergic to shellfish,
yep,
endoskeletons are not your friend.
Yes.
Don't try these either, or at least make sure you're trying them very safely so you can get whatever assistance you need.
Yes. That, you know, that's one thing. I had no idea of the diversity of shellfish allergies that there are in the world. Some people are allergic to only seawater shellfish, has something to do with the iodine. Some are allergic to all of them. So
what are the other things that you have to watch out for? So like, I mean, are there fungi that grow up in cricket world, or, you know, like what keeps you like, ooh, I hope that never happens to me, and I'm making big efforts to stay away from that.
I hope I don't
in your herd.
In my orchestra. It is an orchestra of crickets.
Is it really an orchestra of crickets?
An orchestra, yes.
Nikki, that's for you, because I know you love all the different names of groups of things.
That one makes sense though, and it's a great trivia.
They do chirp. Yeah.
Yes, they do. And it's only the males that chirp, and only when they're ready to breed, but you will learn that in the farm video. So yeah, I think from a food safety perspective, you know, we treat it like any other food. So once it's harvested, that is where it enters into your food safety plan, shall we say. But for me, like, I take a step back from that even, and I worry about the feed source and I worry about the water source, because those are the two main inputs. Mm-hmm. So the water gets tested to make sure that it's up to EPA drinking standards, and then the feed we have from a trusted source that is, you know, right. So you control the controllables on that, and then, but once it's like any other raw agricultural product, once it starts, it's
moving towards the market.
Yes, it's journey along it. There's multiple different kill steps. Like I said, I have a full FSMA compliant food safety plan that I had to go through and become a preventative controls qualified individual to be able to write that and do all of those things. But again, for me, it's great because, so literal farrow to finish, if you are familiar with hog farms, farrow to finish sort of operation in the cricket world, I'm doing all of that, and I own that entire supply chain. So I'm very confident in my process, if you will. So our main kill step is our cooking. Like that's what it takes care of. any and everything. What I'm concerned with on the raising the cricket side, a power outage when it's cold, that would be certain death. Like that one, during the winter, and right now, we are
tornado season and stuff like that. Just makes you crazy.
Yes, that's what we're in right now. That's what we like. Last week we had some really big storms come through, and I'm just like, okay, the generator's in the shop. We gotta make sure gas is in it. Like, we're putting it on the truck now. Like, it's just, so things like that really concern me. You have some disease risk, but if you are not bringing in outside crickets, that's relatively low, as long as, again, your food
So you're
source.
not taking the crickets that I like harvest on my way to your farm?
Yeah, no. Generally speaking, if someone's been to another cricket farm recently, like, I won't let you in my farm, but the amount of people that I can't let in my farm is very small. So, and generally speaking, don't want to come. So it's fine. But so that there's that slight biosecurity risk, if you will. The other thing that I think people probably don't think about is the farm is set up to be conducive to insects growing well.
Yeah.
So that means that, like, you don't really get to choose which insects decide that it's a nice place to be. Spiders are a little bit of a problem and a concern. We have these little dermestid beetles that, like, we just need to keep under control. Our best way of doing that, though, like, it's all manual. You have to vacuum them or you have to smash them. Like, you don't have any, you can't do any chemical options. There's no like species specific pesticide that's gonna like only get rid of my daddy long legs and my little dermestid beetles but leave my crickets alone. Like, that doesn't exist. So that's a challenge. But there's ways around it. So
that's funny. I hadn't, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes. But not something you ever considered.
not something I've ever thought about, because, all I think about is crickets getting in the house, and you hear the male cricket like, ooh, and it's like, stop it, I can't sleep until you get out of here. So, but crickets, you have them are like, we saw the eggs, then the teeny tinies.
Yes.
And then only when they're bigger do they chirp.
Correct. Yep. So it's only the males that chirp, and only when they are ready to breed.
They're feeling good.
Yes. So it's called stridulation, and it is there's like a serrated edge underneath their wings, and they rub their wings against that, and it creates the chirp. So majority of the time, though, my barn is very quiet, silent, if you will. And, that's a question I get a lot, is like, how loud is it? Because everybody thinks of that one in their garage or their basement that they can't find and drives them nuts.
Because that one seems so dang loud.
It does. It does. And, it's just, he's lonely. He's looking for a friend, which is fine. I appreciate that fact. But the other question I get from people is like, do you not get really annoyed in there when it's chirping? But everybody thinks of the one they can't find.
That's the white noise then.
Exactly. So it's funny that you say white noise. So I actually have a 15-minute and an 11-hour and 59-minute video on my YouTube channel of the chirping, because there's like an ASMR world out there.
I'm so gonna have to find that link.
Yes, you should, because the like I said, I have a 15-minute one, but then I did an 11-hour and 59-minute live stream of the cricket farm, and people sleep to it. So like, that is a thing. Like, my YouTube channel has been so interesting and so random, because I give away basically how I do everything on my YouTube channel. It's just
because who else wants to do it? Like, I mean, that's the thing I think a lot of people need to understand about YouTube, is you can learn all kinds of stuff on YouTube, but you may not want to do it all.
Right. Well,
so
and
sharing what you're doing is what people find interesting, and then they want to buy little roasted crickets that are hot and spicy, like the ones I've got in front of me.
Yeah, well, and I don't necessarily find that people don't want to do it. Like, my YouTube channel skews heavily male, which is, I mean, I know YouTube skews heavily male in terms of audience anyways, but like, in comparison to all my other social media, it's like heavily male, which is interesting in and of itself. But I get a lot of, again, the reptile keepers, the people that are just trying to feed a pet that they have, and they're like, these crickets are too expensive at the pet store, like, we want to start our own colony, we need the basics. So that, I get a lot of that. But again, one of the funnier and stranger ones was, I had a guy that literally watched all of my videos because he was raising crickets to keep in his bedroom to sleep to. So
okay, does that become like the crazy cat person you worry about, like, because that's not that's not considered clean if you like fill your house with cats. Would there not be some like questionable results of having just crickets everywhere?
I mean, you would have them contained, like with, you can grow them in a habitat. It is not what I would like. I would just go find my 11-hour and 59-minute video and let that puppy roll the whole night.
Because you do have to feed, water.
Yeah. They become an expensive hobby.
And you like, I don't know, do you say you breed crickets?
I say I raise them. Okay. Yeah, you breed them.
So because you have eggs,
yes.
like you have to do something to get the eggs.
Yes, they breed themselves.
They collect.
Yes.
You just collect the eggs?
Correct. I collect the eggs and then incubate them.
Okay, so the eggs are like little tiny pinheads, but smaller. And they're white, so they almost disappear.
Well, but so the one that you popped today.
Yeah, that was ready to be.
Infanticide. Be a cricket. No, I'm totally kidding. I handed it to you. It's just a sensation that you have to feel to understand. So those eggs are a day or two from hatching.
Okay.
When they were first laid, they were completely translucent. You would barely be able to see them.
So did they lay them in one place? Like, is there a typical...
So each female lays 5 to 10 per day.
Okay.
I think I'm catching a lot of them, but I think if she wants to go lay them somewhere else, she's doing it.
And they need the moisture off of the peat moss?
Yes, the substrate with which they get laid in must remain moist until they hatch. Otherwise, the eggs are non-viable.
Yeah.
So as poppy, if you will, as that egg was, again, that's a really permeable surface that just it's not
it's
like
absorbing water the whole time.
It's not like people think of eggs, they think of chicken egg with a hard exterior that like you can't imagine it drying out, if you will.
Yeah,
it's just not how it is with crickets. And then they maintain their high maintenance-ness.
The things I've learned about crickets today.
I know. I dare say you might notice little crickets this spring as they're hatching out.
There were little crickets everywhere.
Yes.
I mean, it just looks like dots of dust at some point.
Yeah. I get people, if it's hatching time and we have babies running around and they'll notice some on the floor because inevitably they never stay where they're supposed to stay. People are like, oh my gosh, you have ants. I'm like, those aren't ants. Look a little closer. Those are little baby crickets. So.
Yeah. And you're just raising them in bins like I keep my Christmas storage in.
Yes. So the current setup is that. That's one thing. So about a quarter mile south of the barn that we were at today, that'll be cricket barn number 2. And it'll be a completely different growing model. So you're going to have to come back to check that one out because there will be no bins. It'll be literal free range crickets running around everywhere. So it's either your nightmare or really cool.
So I don't know that too many people would have nightmares about crickets.
No.
Other than the sound making you crazy when you're trying to go to sleep and you expect it to be quiet or something. But, I mean, Jiminy Cricket's nice.
Yeah, you would be surprised.
Some people are really worried about them.
Some people are absolutely terrified. They have either a sibling or a parent that like traumatized them at one point in their childhood. And they are just absolutely terrified of them. I don't know. Crickets are really in many ways, are really polarizing for people. Either they're terrified of them or they just think they're completely gross. Yeah. And it is what it is. I think part of it is because they're just so common. There's crickets everywhere in the fall.
Yeah,
and so
you're
I think,
used to crickets.
Yeah, they're just such a familiar thing, and they're across the board seen as a pest. So, I don't know.
Well, we talked about what you feed them a little bit while we were in the shop, in the barn. Mm-hmm. Is it a barn? What do you call that place?
I call it my cricket castle.
The cricket castle.
Yes.
When we were in the castle.
I need to come up with a good name for the second one.
Lettuce and potatoes, some water.
Yes, and we only feed out the fresh produce to the baby crickets, and that is sort of a hydration measure, sort of a like don't die on me just because measure. We pull out all the stops for the babies because they tend to have the highest mortality rate of any of the age. They're delicate. They're a pain. So we do that, but then we feed them a non-GMO grain based. It's called an insect diet. It comes from Bioforge Labs about 7 miles south of here from Huxley. Just happens to be one of the top 10 specialty feed mills in the U.S. and is 7 miles away. Like sometimes you just get lucky. But one of the, in addition to it being non-GMO, it has to be non-GMO or organic because the pesticide residues are too high in conventional. It really impacts the immune system of the crickets and you start having all sorts of problems. The other major piece that I think gets missed sometimes by people who are more hobbyist, shall we say, is you need to have animal protein in there. If you do not, they will start to cannibalize. They will get their complete protein one way or another, and I prefer that they get it from their feed and not their friend. So, yes.
So tell me, you said in the castle, when we were in the castle, you said that you harvest maybe 7 times a year and stuff. How do you like clean in between generations of crickets? Because like you've got all ages going on in there right now.
Yep. So you majority of them are going to be within a week of each other. So harvest and hatching and all that stuff happens within like a week to 10 days. My 2 racks of older crickets that you saw today, I call those my insurance crickets. And they are just like a few weeks behind so that if something catastrophic happens, I have just
some that are laying there
now. Yes. Some that will be laying shortly. You know, just insurance crickets. That's just what I don't know what else to call them. So the beautiful thing about cricket poop is it's dry.
Okay.
Completely dry. So it's easy to deal with. You just sweep it up and you sweep it up and I put it in a big thing that my mom then puts on the garden.
I was going to say it's got to be a flower bed garden. Something.
Yes, it's fantastic for that. She needs to dump it out because it's full, but it's fine. That's another conversation for another day. So, you know, scooping all of that stuff out, what I was having this winter is I was having when you're in the winter and you perhaps don't vacuum as much as you should, you end up with more spiders and things than you want. And so what I did for the last 2 rounds while it was still cold out, I stuck my bins outside.
Okay.
Use the freeze to naturally take care of the things, all of the nooks and crannies, because there's a lot of nooks and crannies. And the other thing is then that enabled me to get all of the bins out of there, so then I could vacuum all of those shelves and like it just made
everything.
Made things a lot easier. We did that this last round as well. Probably will do that moving forward, just even as it gets warmer. Just because, like I said, it just makes it easier to get in all of the nooks and crannies and move things around. But outside of that, like we don't use any chemicals to clean things because the residue left over is going to cause you problems. Yeah. With everything remaining dry, you're not worried. As long as your populations are healthy and you aren't seeing any sort of stress or anything like that, there's no reason to do anything more drastic.
So I have to ask, like usually on farms we talk bushels, pounds, tons, ounces.
Yeah. Well, so you'll notice your roasted cricket packages there.
Half an ounce.
Half an ounce, yep. So best things in life are weighed in grams, as they say.
Like tomato seed.
Yeah.
Precious.
Yes. You know, it's so for us it's pounds. I worry about pounds. And I have certain targets I like to hit per square foot, like poundage per square foot produced kind of thing. I always tell people when they start out, a good place to start is 0.5 to 0.6 pounds per square foot of grow space.
Okay.
Hit that target, then come talk to me.
And just so we make sure everybody gets the picture, the grow space is in a bin, and inside that bin you had like egg trays kind of things so that each cricket can have its own little space if it wants to. And when like high rises for crickets.
Yes, cricket condos is what they've been called before. But anyways, so yeah, but I should clarify. I don't think of the per square foot as the square footage of the egg flats per se.
So you include like the shelving.
I just say the square foot, like square foot of bin space.
Great.
So I don't know if it's like 4 square feet or whatever per bin, then you want, 2 pounds plus out of there. So I tell people when they're starting out, get to that 2 pound mark, and then like we can potentially optimize up to a pound or a pound and a half, just depending on your setup. So that's the rule of thumb we like to hit. Crickets don't grow as well in the winter. They slow down naturally, circadian rhythm, and also the limitation of the current cricket barn. You can't bring in fresh air, so that limits the population size, all of the things that way. They grow much better in the summer. So where in the winter, if we're getting over 2 pounds per bin, we're doing great.
Yeah.
In the summer, we can get up in the 5 to 7 pound range.
Okay.
So it's a pretty big difference. And so that's where I'm excited for this new barn, because the Cricket Castle, I built that in the beginning of 2019. I was like less than a year into raising crickets. I'm like, retrospectively, like I had to get a bigger space. Like I needed more crickets, all of the things. But I also like didn't really know what I needed, what was going to work well.
A lot of people don't know what they don't know until they start doing things anyway, right?
Man,
so
yes.
You learn a lot once you've done something wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And so now, like jumping from, so that Cricket Castle is 11 by 54. The new Cricket Barn is going to be 45 by 60.
Okay.
So it's going to be significantly larger. We're not going up, like we're not going vertical up tall, like everything will be...
You are not 12 foot tall,
no,
so let's not make a...
Yes, and also, like, it, like we were talking about in the barn earlier, the taller you go, the harder it is to have a uniform temperature gradient and everything else, and that's really important. So.
Yeah. And lifting high things, heavy things high.
Yeah, is not super
smart.
Great. Yeah, not super great, so...
Well, I thought I was going to ask you like a lot of questions, and we've just talked. But I think we covered almost every one of the questions I had, which is so weird because it doesn't usually work that way.
Sorry.
So if people want to get in touch with you, I usually see you on Instagram. I have seen your YouTube channel and stuff, but why don't you tell us what your username is on all the things so people can look you up quickly, and I'll put the links in too.
Perfect. Yeah. So I am on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, not on Snapchat, never will be. Like, it's one of those people are like, why aren't you on Snapchat? I'm like, no, I gotta draw the line somewhere, and it's gotta be at that. So you just can find me at Jim and Eat Crickets, and that's GYMNEAT. So like Jim and Eat.
Because she likes to work out.
Yes, exactly. So Jim and Eat Crickets. There's underscores and stuff in there for Instagram, but everything else, it's usually all one word. On YouTube, though, you can find me under the Cricket Lady, because that's what everybody calls me. Nobody remembers my name. Everybody remembers what I do. So yeah, all of those.
I love it. Anything else that I like totally forgot to ask you about that like people go, oh my God, the cricket farmer? Because it's funny, when I told people I was coming up here to meet the cricket farmer, first, a lot of time nobody had thought about farming crickets,
right?
But then the other thing is people wanted to know live market or food. In my family, they assumed it was food, but they had to ask the question.
Yeah.
And then other people were just like, oh my God, I can't wait to hear it, while others were like, that's not going to be my favorite episode.
Yeah, that's okay. For the people who think it's not going to be their favorite episode,
just wait until they meet Shelby.
How do you feel now? I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. You cannot shock me with the things that get said to me, or, the questions that I get asked. I always, you preface this recording with, I'm really sorry if I ask dumb questions. I'm like, I raise crickets. Everybody's got dumb questions. Like, everybody has the same questions. Honestly, the only people who ever stump me with their questions.
Little kids.
Because
they don't know what you're supposed to ask.
No idea. And they are the only ones. And they'll be like, well, how big is the head? How long are the legs? Hypothetically speaking, if you took these down to South America during the winter, would they grow faster? I'm like, what? I'm sorry, what? So 4-H clubs are my favorite because they end up having the really wide array of ages, and when they come up in tour, that's usually when I'm like, I have not thought about that. So thank you.
Well, I love it. Thanks so much for doing this podcast with me, because I know it's one of those strange people that just reaches out to you and says, "Ooh, I want to talk about crickets." So I appreciate it, and I know that our friends RNA and Sarah and some folks appreciate getting crickets a little time on the microphone, because it's not discussed all the time. And I think, like my grandmother probably didn't eat a lot of avocados in her life, and look how much better life is now with avocados. So
amen to that.
Let's just think outside the box now and then.
For sure. Go out of your comfort zone. Why not?
Thanks, Shelby.
You're welcome.
Gonna tell you, I enjoy going out on the farm no matter what kind of farm it is so far. So I went to a cricket farm. Tell me where else. Like, have you ever thought of Going to blank farm, Janice. Check it out. You can drop that on social media or on our website, which is also where we have the video from this. Would love to hear from you guys. You can always drop us a line at groundedbythefarm@gmail.com. Or if you want to call and just leave a voicemail, we might feature it on a future episode. That number is 989-303-8489. Thanks so much, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another awesome episode.